Hi there, I'm meteorologist Mary Mays, and this is my second update on Idalia, which is actually still a tropical storm. I do expect it to become a hurricane shortly, but let's go ahead and get into it and talk about what's ahead. All right, so there she is. This is visible satellite, which means we're going to lose it soon because we're getting a little bit closer to sunset, but you can see some healthy convection. It's starting to look a little bit rounder, a little bit more symmetrical. The center is forming. Now, notice that northwest corner is a little bit clearer. There has been some wind shear working its way in, but it looks like that's probably not going to be an issue for much longer. And the development of the storm, the intensification, has been steady. It hasn't been rapid intensification yet. And that is the key word, yet. This is likely going to get a lot stronger as it continues to move north into those really warm Gulf waters. And it's just going to be heading into a more favorable environment for intensification, which is why the track has it as a major hurricane when it makes landfall in likely the Big Bend later this week, most likely Wednesday morning. That's our current forecast track. Now, we do have another update coming up in another couple of hours, give or take, depending on when I post this, but I just didn't feel like waiting that long. We could see this officially be upgraded to a hurricane depending on what they find. We've had hurricane hunters flying through this all day long, so the models are getting some really good information, and you see a little bit of kind of cirrus out here. Looks like this system is developing. It's looking good. It's trying to form that center, trying to form that eye wall. And, it's not great news. It's not what we want to see. We would rather see dry air and shear tearing this thing apart. That's just not happening. So if you take a look at the National Hurricane Center, winds are sustained right now as of 5:07 p.m. Central Time. Winds are sustained at 70 miles an hour, so we're really close to this storm becoming a hurricane, and it's moving north at 8 miles per hour, so it is pushing to the north, heading into those more favorable conditions, and tomorrow is likely when we're going to start to see that rapid intensification. So let's take a look at our high definition. These are our HAFS models, and I'm looking at HAFS A. And, the models have been interesting. HAFS B is a little bit more bullish with this system. HAFS A looks pretty realistic, though, and what it's showing is you see this interacting with the western tip of Cuba, which, by the way, has, I think, hurricane warnings in effect. And you see this interacting with the tip, but it doesn't really do much to it. And then you really start to see that convection kind of filling in on that westerly side. And, the right side of a hurricane is always the stronger side, but you really start to see that westerly side kind of getting its act together. And then as it moves into the Gulf there, you can see Florida on the right, and it starts to get that center, gets that eye wall forming, and pressure drops, and then bam, it's a major hurricane right as it's about to make landfall. And landfall, so far, the models have been fairly consistent with landfall kind of near the Big Bend area, likely around Cedar Key. Things could change, but that is what we're looking at. And then things get even more interesting because you see the storm heading onshore through northern Florida into southern Georgia. And at this point, it's going to still be a really strong storm as it moves over and to areas like Savannah and to Charleston before it kind of rides along the Carolinas, still likely as a tropical storm at this point. So yeah, it's going to be a big threat, not only for the coastline, but for interior areas as well. So let's talk a little bit more about impacts, because I think we've kind of already sort of set the stage for what's going on. And that is that Idalia is a healthy storm right now. It's been slowly intensifying. It hasn't been, rapidly intensifying yet, but the convection's looking pretty good. It's trying to form that center. There's been a little bit of wind shear coming in the northwest, but things are about to move a lot faster, and you don't have a ton of time to prepare. So let's talk about who needs to be prepared. So you see the track here, the latest track, and once again, we'll have another update coming out soon, but we got a major hurricane hitting, and right there, that's the hurricane warnings. And this stretches all the way down through Tampa Bay, from Apalachicola to Tampa Bay into even the Port Charlotte area, and then Fort Myers down through Naples under a tropical storm warning. You got a hurricane warning for Cuba, and then still tropical storm warnings for the Yucatan Peninsula. And what's happening is this storm kind of gets lifted up kind of moves north. We got a little trough that's going to kind of suck it up. You got high pressure, in the Yucatan right here, also off into, the Caribbean, and got a high. So it's kind of just steering this kind of to the northeast. And what we see is this becoming a hurricane tonight, most likely, if not tomorrow. But I would say, I think it's going to be a hurricane with this next update. Or it may be really close, but I think it should be. It looks like it's becoming a hurricane on the visible satellite at the very least. And actually, we could take a look right now at satellite imagery. I kind of want to see what this looks like in infrared, because you could see those, thunderstorms, that convection really bubbling up throughout the day today, and keeping an eye on that. So it is starting to look more and more like a hurricane. So we'll see. We'll see with this next update. But the track is interesting. You have to remember that even if you're outside the cone, that's just where they expect the center to be. So even if you're outside of the cone, you're still likely going to feel some pretty big impacts, especially if you're on the right side of this storm. So you're going to have some surge in areas like Fort Myers down through Naples, and likely some bigger impacts in the Tampa Bay area. And these two lines here, that's kind of the margin of error. This is where the National Hurricane Center thinks the center of the storm is going, the eye of the storm. So if the eye ends up here, you're in some really big trouble in Tampa. And then also if the eye ends up here, you're going to be in bigger trouble in areas like Tallahassee possibly. So it really depends on where this is heading, and inland, areas like Jacksonville, Gainesville, Savannah, Charleston, you're going to see some big impacts from the storm most likely as well. So even if you're in the interior locations, you need to pay attention. If you're on the coast, if you're in Cedar Key, you need to know your zone, and when they tell you to evacuate, get out. And evacuation's likely you need to be out by tomorrow morning if possible. And we'll talk about why, but National Hurricane Center, most of the models have been pretty consistent showing a landfall near Cedar Key. That's what you need to know. Big Bend, Cedar Key, right side of the storm is usually the stronger side. That's usually where the tornadoes are. It's still going to be surge across a big portion of the coastline. There's so many impacts with this to talk about. So let's take a look at surge. So even in Tampa Bay, 4 to 7 feet. Charlotte Harbor, you're going to see 2 to 4 feet down through Fort Myers. So it's not necessarily devastating, but you could still see some coastal flooding pretty easily with this. I'm hoping for the best for Southwest Florida. Things can change, as you know and you remember with Ian. I know it's rough to see a hurricane so close, but it really does look like a Big Bend landfall is the most likely scenario. That being said, I will keep you updated. You'll see some impacts from this, but not the brunt of the storm. Now, the Big Bend area from Chassahowitzka into the Osceola River. I'm not great at saying that, but in the red, you have up to 12 feet of storm surge. So that has been upped for another foot there in that area since this morning. So this could be deadly storm surge. We're still expecting landfall as a Category 3, but you can't rule out a Category 4 with this. I wouldn't be surprised. We're definitely looking at a major hurricane, and, if you're looking, it doesn't matter if you're looking at a 3 or a 4 or a 5 even, you need to get out if you're under an evacuation alert. And you're going to have a mandatory evacuation for a major hurricane if you're, in a surge area. So just keep that in mind. If they're telling you to leave, leave. It doesn't matter what the category is. You need to go because you're going to have flooding. Now, that's the forecast here. So from Indian Pass into the Ocklawaha River, I'm so bad at these names, 3 to 5 feet of surge possible. And I hope I'm saying them as best as I can. I try. You also have some surge on the other side too, 1 to 3 feet from St. Mary's down into, looks like Flagler Beach there near St. Augustine. And then along the Georgia coastline up through South Santee River. So that's from St. Mary's up. You're looking at 2 to 4 feet. So Tybee Island is going to flood a little bit, especially the road to it. So just a heads up there if you live on Tybee. Make sure you have everything you need, because you might not be able to get off the island very easily. That's usually the range when you start to see flooding on Tybee. And yeah, so that's the peak storm surge that we're looking at. that's not the only threat. Here's when we start to see the earliest reasonable arrival of tropical storm force winds, aka this is when you need to have all your preparations done by. So, Southwest Florida, you'll see some tropical storm force winds early Tuesday, so early tomorrow morning around 8 a.m. Once again, you're not expecting the brunt of this system. You will see some impacts from this. You might get a few of those outer bands moving in. Those could produce tornadoes, but this is not Ian. We're watching this carefully. Of course, the path can change, but our models are consistent with a Big Bend landfall. However, it doesn't mean you're not going to see anything at all. You'll get the wind. You might get a couple tornadoes, and you're also going to get a little bit of storm surge. Around the Tampa area, St. Pete, Tampa, you need to have your preparations done by Tuesday morning as well, because you'll see some tropical storm force winds by the early afternoon. And notice a lot of this action spreads over to the east coast of Florida. You're going to have some wind issues and some of those outer bands possibly making their way to your neck of the woods. Tuesday evening, the Big Bend, if you don't have your preparations done by Tuesday evening, the winds are going to be picking up. You're not going to be able to get anything done. And really, if you're in the Big Bend, if you're in an evacuation area, if you are in a mandatory evacuation area, you need to think about leaving now or by tomorrow morning, because you're running out of time. And then you start to see this moving in by Wednesday morning, South Georgia, pretty much all Georgia, Jacksonville, I would say overnight Tuesday into Wednesday. That's when you start to see winds picking up. And then as this storm continues to move out into the Atlantic, you're going to have those winds throughout Wednesday and Thursday. So that kind of lets you know, really, ideally, everyone would have their preparations done by tomorrow morning and will have left if they need to. If you're in Cedar Key, even just evacuating inland to a hotel, to, just a sturdy structure, a shelter, just moving inland away from the storm surge threat is going to save your life. So that's what you need to know about that. And let's take a look also about the flooding risk. So in addition to, those outer bands leading to tornadoes, we could see some gusty winds. Of course, you could get those tropical storm force winds, maybe even greater, into Georgia. Georgia, there's a very good chance that this storm is going to remain a Category 1, possibly even a little bit stronger as it moves into South Georgia. Because you look at that, a Big Bend landfall, that's not a ton of space here. That's not a ton of territory. It's still going to be pretty strong as it moves in. And you also have the threat for flash flooding, in addition to tornadoes and wind damage. Prepare for power outages. Make sure you have water. Make sure you have food for a few days. That can be prepared without power. Really, that's what you got to focus on. And if you have medical needs, you may need to leave the area and come back if you can't deal with a power outage. And I know that's difficult. Ideally, that's the best option. If not, having a generator, reach out to friends, family. A lot of times working together can help you stay safer. But if you're in the Big Bend area, that's where we're expecting landfall. And we're going to keep a close eye on this storm, Idalia, into the overnight. And it is pronounced Idalia. I have double checked with the National Hurricane Center. They always have a pronunciation guide, which I always need. And yeah, so once again, looks like it's going to be a landfall as a Category 3, likely in the Big Bend area. This is kind of the Cedar Key area. It's going to be an impactful storm. It's going to have big impacts along the coastline there. It's also going to have some big impacts inland. So basically, my main point is, if you haven't prepared yet, do so now. Check in with friends, check in with family, and, you can evacuate inland. You don't necessarily have to go to a different state. If you're on the coast, if you're in an area that gets storm surge and you're being told to leave, just moving a few miles inland can mean the difference between life and death. So please stay safe. Check in with the National Hurricane Center, your local weather people on TV, your local National Weather Service office. They're going to have all the detailed information you need for your community. And I'm going to keep up with these updates as we head into the next couple of days. So thanks for joining in, and take care.